Individuals you work with within the sober home, that you'll have an open mind, that you'll listen today to all sides and come out enlightened and educated about the issue of sober homes. As fair housing advocates, we take this issue very seriously, and we want you to make sure that you understand all sides of this issue.
Next, I'd like to introduce Patricia Rosen. Patricia is the publisher and editor of TheSoberWorld magazine. TheSoberWorld magazine educates families and people who are suffering from addiction. It is the only magazine of its kind that provides education and resources about addiction and recovery. The magazine reaches thousands of people per month through the printed publication, website, and social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Patricia launched TheSoberWorld magazine in 2011 after her son Stephen died from a prescription drug overdose. This tragedy led her to launch the magazine as a means of giving back to families who are suffering the perils of addiction. She wanted to provide a comprehensive resource that provides education about addiction and resources that are available to aid in recovery. As the former vice president and treasurer of Virgin Graphics, Inc., a printing company in Deerfield Beach, she gained experience in the printing industry that has helped her as publisher of SoberWorld magazine. She attended the University of Miami and studied liberal arts. Patricia grew up in northern New Jersey and has moved to Florida 25 years ago. Patricia is the proud mother of 3 beautiful children and currently resides in Boca Raton, Florida. Patricia?
I want to thank Angela for inviting me here today and everybody else that made today possible. If anyone told me 31 years ago when my son was born that I would be sitting here as a parent who has lost a child to drugs, I would have looked at them like they were crazy. But I have learned through my son's tragic death and the many people that I meet on a daily basis, no one is immune to addiction. It's happening to families across the country regardless of their economic position, their race, or religion. Addiction knows no bounds. 5 out of 6 families are affected by addiction. If it's not in your immediate family, then a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, someone you know is affected by it. Before I give you my opinion or talk about sober recovery residences, I think it would make really good sense for those of you that are not involved in the recovery business to understand addiction and what's happening right now in this country. What's happening here in Palm Beach County with the sober homes is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is a really small problem in the scheme of things. Addicts and addiction have been around since the beginning of time, but no one spoke about it. There is something called stigma. And does anyone here know what stigma is? Can they give the definition? Anybody want to? Well, I'll tell you. Stigma, a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. Unfortunately, addiction, along with mental health, carries a stigma. People, up to now at least, didn't speak about it. Families were ashamed and sent their family members away, so people didn't know what was going on in their homes. Alcoholics were sent to mental institutions because they didn't know what to do with that. No one spoke about addiction or mental health. But now, with the epidemic in our country and all the families that are affected by this, there are people, such as myself, that are finding our voices and saying, enough is enough. There is nothing to be ashamed about. Addiction is a scientific proven brain disease, and it must be treated as such. Just as you would go to a doctor for cancer or diabetes, someone struggling with drugs or alcohol must get help. Families need to know that it's okay to reach out for help and that they are in no way responsible for their loved one's addiction. The more people that speak out and the more people that come forward and say, I am in recovery and I am where you were today, the more lives that will be saved. There are millions of people that are addicts, but they are in recovery today. This is what is happening now. The stigma is starting to dissipate. People are speaking out, and they are also seeking help, which is one reason why we are seeing so many recovery homes opening, and the other reason I'll address in a moment. I also feel it's very important for you to know who my son was, because everyone thinks, not my child, not in our family. My son was an extremely intelligent young man who graduated college with honors. He grew up in a very comfortable home, went to camp, a mother and father who loved him, 2 brothers, and every opportunity to become a successful person. He even interned one summer at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York for Dr. Eric Hollander, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he's world renowned for his work with OCD and autism. He was offered a job at the end of the summer by Dr. Hollander, but he turned it down because he wanted to finish college. That's how bright he was. So you're probably wondering, how did a smart, good-looking, and kind young man become involved with drugs? How did he lose his life? Well, after finishing college, his intentions were to go for his master's and work. He was surprised, though, after 2 weeks of being out of college, that the offers weren't pouring in. So he was feeling a little depressed and was offered a pharmaceutical drug, which he took, and that was the beginning of the end. The funny thing is, within that week, he was offered a job, which ironically had him writing treatment plans for those struggling with addiction. This very bright young man with a very promising future began to lose his way. For those of you that aren't familiar with drugs, the drug he was offered was Oxycontin. Oxycontin is an opiate which is highly addictive and is the same thing as heroin, only in a pill form. Oxycontin is a highly addictive and is the same thing as heroin. 100 years ago, the Bayer Company, and we know Bayer aspirin, Bayer Company introduced heroin, and it was banned after people became addicted. We now have Pharma, the pharmaceutical giant who has made billions of dollars, who has reintroduced heroin in pill form known as Oxycontin, and doctors are wined and dined to prescribe it. If you go into a hospital even, all they will ask you, what is your pain level? What is your pain? How much pain are you in? We now have doctors and hospitals prescribing opiate-based medications for everyday problems, thus the epidemic of overdose deaths and those struggling with addiction. The Hollywood version of an addict is someone under a bridge with a needle in his arm and drool coming out of his mouth. But that's just what it is, a Hollywood version. I have heard addicts or people in recovery referred to as those people. Well, those people today are your doctor, your lawyer, your dry cleaner person, your middle school, high school, college child, your graduate, and your parents. Yes, as sad as that sounds, people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are becoming addicted because they are being prescribed opiates, and it's causing more falls and accidents than ever before. So I ask you, if a sober home opened in your backyard, but it was for people in their 70s, would you feel the same way as young people that you see in recovery? Or if a sober home opens in your backyard and it was just for the medical profession, our doctors that are addicted, would you feel the same way? Because this is exactly what's happening now. There are special tracks for people 55 and over. There's special tracks for doctors, nurses, first responders, even extremely wealthy tycoons. Again, addiction knows no bounds. It's affecting everyone. And as I said, addiction is a disease, and as with any disease, you need to get help. Unfortunately, addiction cannot be cured with an operation or a pill. It requires abstinence, guidance, sometimes medication for an underlying mental health issue, and being in a sober environment. For anyone here who opposes the sober recovery residences in your backyard, I think understanding the process of recovery would be helpful, because by the time a person gets to a recovery residence, they are no longer on drugs. The first step to recovery begins with detox. This is a facility that helps to wean the person off the drug so they are no longer physically dependent. And this can be anywhere from 3 days to over a week, maybe even longer, depending on what they were addicted to and how long it takes to get them weaned off of it. The second step is a 30, 60, or 90-day program, and sometimes people even go for a year somewhere. This is where the patient works with a therapist, a psychiatrist, and other professionals. They figure out the best plan and work at it on a daily basis. By the time they leave, they are clear-headed and ready to practice what they have learned. The third step is a sober recovery residence. And this is where the individual can start to immerse himself or herself back into their former lives gradually with the structure and help of others that are sober. It may be going back to school, a job, outpatient treatment, or whatever they were doing prior to their addiction. This is where the many people, your doctor, your lawyer, your dry cleaner, this is where they all went to practice the tools they learned in recovery. This is the next step, and this is the most important step. They need the support of others who are sober, and they also need structure, which they would not get if they went back home, because most times their parents or loved ones aren't in recovery, don't have a problem with drugs, and they're not equipped to give them what they need. When I found out that sober homes weren't licensed or regulated, I was appalled. I firmly believe that we need to regulate them and have certain standards in place. A legitimate house has rules in place. They have curfews, zero tolerance for drugs, gambling, and indecent language, no pets, no physical confrontations, no people from outside allowed in the home without permission. Thank you, George Jan. I took this from your rules. In a legitimate home, anybody not respecting the rules is asked to leave. As a mother, I want to know my loved one is in a safe environment. Just like you don't want to hear parties all night in your backyard or see people doing drugs in the street, I wouldn't want my child or loved one to go where there are drugs and loitering either. This is the purpose of a sober house. No drugs, no partying, structure. We want, just as you want, a respectable, clean, and sober environment. And to calm everybody down, I have a friend who has her house listed right now for $1.2 million. 2 homes on her block are sober homes. It has not devalued her house. It didn't. It will not. Her house is still worth what it's worth, which is a lot of money. Luckily, FAR and NAR are working towards this goal, and legislation is changing, so those in recovery will have a chance for a healthier life. I suggest, rather than working not to have a sober home in your backyard, work with your local representatives, work with FAR, work with NAR, help figure out how you can keep the people that are not in it for the right reasons closed or not allowed to open in the first place. We can't always choose our neighbors, and whether someone is in recovery, that doesn't make them a bad person or a bad neighbor. They are the same as you and I, trying to live in a clean, decent environment. If Michael Botticelli moved in next door, would you have a problem with that? For those of you who don't know who he is the director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, informally known as the drug czar. He is in recovery. But seriously, there are those that are not in it for the right reason, and they will hinder someone's recovery for $1, and those people do need to be stopped. I urge everyone here that doesn't want a sober recovery residence in their backyard to rethink your position. With the epidemic facing the country, you will not stop the sober homes from going in your backyard, but with the same determination, you could help to regulate how they are operated in order to have a home next door that you would be proud to live next to, and that unsavory people will not have the opportunity to make money off of this terrible disease. Remember, addiction knows no bounds. It can happen to you or somebody close to you. Addiction isn't a choice, it's a disease. If you think differently, I invite you to attend my bereavement group and speak to a couple of mothers whose children took their own lives, not through drugs, but because they couldn't handle being an addict, and no matter how they tried, they couldn't attain recovery. This is the hard and sad truth. We need your help, not your opposition. Help us to make recovery better. Help us to sleep knowing our loved ones are in good hands. You can help make that happen. I also think with the same determination you have for not having a sober home in your backyard, you can get involved in reaching our politicians to find out, more importantly, why the FDA keeps approving medication that is only acceptable for end-of-life care. It has been proven that they do not help rid someone of pain, it only makes it worse. As long as we allow them to keep prescribing opiate medication, heroin, this epidemic is going to continue to get worse, not better. We are creating a generation of addicts. If we can end or limit the prescribing of these pharmaceutical pills, the need for rehab and sober homes would drastically be reduced. Thank you.